Yeah, I'm fascinated by how this can fit into the more broad work that a number of us are working on from different angles in UNICEF on social change. And I can't help but think of the hygiene example, where in hygiene they completely revolutionized the way they end open defecation by having the community itself become aware of all the shit that's in the community, literally. And in a way, you can transpose that idea and say this has become making the community aware, or initially the girls, of all the unsafe spots in the community. But that can be part of a much bigger discussion about the unacceptability of violence or risk spaces in the community. So I think, picking up also on what you just said about how this tool can lead to things we don't know, that's fine, but I think we can be more active in creating the spaces for that kind of discussion to happen. And what we know is that that's a part in our programming that we don't do as much as we probably should, of creating the spaces, the facilitation for that kind of discussion to happen, so that those additional energies can be released and channeled positively, collectively within the groups, and bringing in the men and bringing in. So I think it is a great tool, but I think it really is important to link it to the experience that we have on social change and really capitalize it as much as possible.
Thank you. Ian.
I think this is really great to see, how much was done here, and with relatively small sum of money. The question that's in my mind is, how easy is this to, and what's happening in terms of replicating it either within Kenya and getting more communities to use this approach, or to get other countries to do this? And then I guess it also relates to your point on sanitation. It's also the immediate thing that came to my mind was, in community-led sanitation, people use maps to kind of get people socially aware about the need to change sanitation practice. Has this kind of approach, using this kind of more digital type of approach, are you aware of it being used for that purpose? Because usually these maps are kind of quite traditional, kind of hand-drawn maps the way it's done. I haven't seen this, or I'm not aware of this kind of approach, but the potential is really there. So
I should mention we also looked at a number of different themes as well, including health services, water and sanitation, and education, mostly informal education, because the groups were already out collecting data on vulnerability and were able to do this as well. So I think it's very clear that these can be used for other themes in a compelling way.
And just Ian, for your question about follow-up, I think I mentioned it in the opening remarks that we are working with the Kenya country office, and we're discussing with them on how this is going to fit in their overall program, because we don't want it to be a gadget. And Francesca, we want to help create these spaces, and we want it to become like an integral part of what the Kenya country office does. As for other countries, we are also working on a proposal to implement it in other countries, and there will be more in 2011. Yeah.
Congratulations. And I'm just curious about what the safe spots. What did the young women identify as safe spots? What did they mean by being safe? Where were they, and do they regularly work in these places?
Yeah, that's a great question. So these were mostly safe spots. So I should start. There's an amazing advocacy organization in Kibera called Binti Pamoja, which is a group that takes young girls and women through a one-year program of training and education around a number of health issues. And what they do is establish when their class graduates, they then go into the community as sort of ambassadors from this group and actually start safe spaces. So these were places that they didn't have a map of before, as far as I could tell, but they were literally like people's homes or a public gathering place where they felt comfortable. And it wasn't quite like a community club or places where they went frequently, but they were places that everyone sort of knew they could go to if they needed. So that's sort of what they identified as safe spaces, at least initially.
So safe from violence.
Mm-hmm, right.
America.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. And so yeah, that's
Any more questions? Yes.
Yeah. Again, I think it's a fascinating intervention, and I can see it having multiple uses in terms of tracking vulnerabilities. I suppose one of the challenges is how you actually measure the impact in terms of reported violence. And I'm just wondering how widely reported is sexual violence, either to NGOs, to health facilities, to the police, and can you use sort of data that's out there to actually record changing levels of violence amongst young women? So I think that would be very powerful to show the impact of a tool like this.
so. I mean, my sense, primarily what I've shown is by its very definition anecdotal, right? It's not in any way a scientific measurement of these things. But in terms of your point on how to leverage some of these things for preventing violence, I think there's a compelling way to use the map, and something I didn't have time to address, which is the use of SMS, of text messages layered on top of maps and networks of text messages among groups of young girls and women, which is something that they're working on currently. So there's a network of gender-based violence responders in MapKiberia who want to understand how can they provide a service to young girls and young women who are experiencing sexual violence and don't really know where to turn. They have access to a shortcode, which is just a 4-number 6006 that you can text. And right now they actually have it set up online where you can text in information about community news events. But what they were exploring, and what they continue to explore, is can this be used as a method for relaying information in sort of a real-time fashion? Obviously not to sort of place on a map in a public view, but to get it into the hands of the right people at the right time, which they identified as a big challenge. So I think using low-cost technology as that network, I think it's been done in other places, is important. But I would love to think more about how this can be used against other metrics that are already being used by UNICEF and others in terms of data collection on some of these things, because I think there's a chance to do that as well.
Just add to that, one of the reasons I thought this would be useful to try, and I'm encouraged by the result, is that so many reports of gender-based violence or public insecurity are based on anecdotes, and it's one person's experience, and that person has to come forward and brave enough, and then it's rare that the authorities can literally follow up in a legal sense to prosecute a perpetrator. And this, by accumulating lots of people's evidence, gives an evidence base, or at least a documentation. These are places that, first of all, the victim isn't alone, which she often feels, and second, that here's a compilation of evidence. Yes, one incident could be random, it could be some crazy person. But when this is systematically documented, for a much stronger base to make those changes. And I think it is a kind of leap of faith that by having those small examples in one community, you can actually change national policy or change I admire Francisco's restraint in not using the word social norms, but change those norms and things that are accepted in the community but are in fact detrimental. I hope it's not a coincidence that 3 months ago 1,000 teachers in Kenya were fired for abusing students for defilement, as it's called there. And it seems to me that this awareness and the idea that there are people out there looking for perpetrators and looking to protect themselves might have some follow-on effects, even if they're not directly related to this project. But Kenya is certainly now taking more interest in the issue than I think the authorities have in the past.
Stephen?
I'd be interested in hearing more about what the follow-up has been with local authorities with elected officials. And Jamie, you were saying it's been challenging in terms of reaching out to some of them. But in terms of what are the thoughts around that in terms of engaging local authorities, especially I think in terms of looking at elected officials, because it's that creating the demand and the accountability now that you're visibilizing a lot of the existing risks and dangers. And that's why I think it can be quite all the way at the highest policy level making in terms of holding MPs accountable or elected officials in very concrete, real ways where you can show this is the risk that we experience as a community. What are you going to do? And how is this map going to look like 4 years from now when you're up for a re-election? What are you going to ensure that this map actually has more blue spaces than red spaces? And we, the community, will hold you accountable. So I think it'd be fascinating just to see how, I'm aware of all the challenges, and it'd be interesting, Jimmy, to hear what are some of those very real challenges in terms of
That's
engagement.
exactly the goal of this, and I think it's the vision of the people who are involved. The OpenStreetMap people were very keen on this. They're moving in a slightly different direction, and I hope that it'll challenge my assumption that this is exactly UNICEF's value added at country and local level. That this is the kind of thing where UNICEF can translate what really is a community project and some good people of goodwill who've done a lot of work up to is this upstream work? How do we use this evidence to actually influence policy? And I have to say, Vera Mendonça, the country office, is fully on board with this and really gets it. Sarah Stahl is trying to work at the regional level to pursue this. So there's some champions within the UNICEF office. But that said, they found they're going harder than I think we had anticipated they would. And here we have something that's very appealing. Everyone who looks at this, I think, from Kenya would start looking at the map and looking at places they knew and identify with it. But at the same time, so far, that has not translated into any champion of someone who can actually do something about it. Right?
Yeah, I think that's right on. I mean, one fantastic thing about working with Vera in the Kenya Country Office was that she could say, I meet monthly with the National AIDS STD Control Program. I meet monthly with the National AIDS Control Council. I can, bring some of these findings to that and put pressure on folks in a way that's compelling and credentialed. And I think the power of bringing together folks like that with some of the really dedicated groups in the community, I think is really, really important. And I didn't see enough of when I was there. So I think that there's a huge opportunity for UNICEF to play a role in strengthening those linkages. And that's, I think, the idea for the next step.
Okay, so if there are no more questions, I think, Jimmy?
Can I challenge the group? We've prepared for funders a couple of examples of potential next mapping exercises, as well as trying to invest some more money in Kenya and Vera itself to be sure that there is follow-up and that all these justified questions of why isn't this resulting in change has a good answer a year from now. But if some of you who work in the field who know situations or who know groups that can take advantage of this kind of technology, it's not something we're going to scale up right away. We really need to be sure that we know what we're doing and these pilots are successful. But we are looking for a couple more pilots for 2011. And so if people have ideas, please pass them on to Vera and his team and with us in each of these sections. And
I would add to that, those, obviously many people with expertise in this area, in terms of tweaking the data collection model. How right now, we've, I think, done something successful going from anecdote, from one girl, as Jimmy said, to a larger aggregation. But what tweaks can we make to the model to make that information, make those stories even more compelling, and make it so that next time, if it comes to the, on the national council or in a community, that can be the most compelling argument that we can make.
Okay. Thanks, Jimmy. Thanks, Josh. Thanks for coming.
Merry Christmas.